Today, I want to talk about potentially the most important tool in your toolbox. I want to talk about a tool that might enable everyone in your organization to be more productive and self-sufficient. Yet, the tool I want to talk about might win an award for the least user-friendly, hardest to maintain, and generally speaking, a tool that might cause you to have nightmares and spend a small fortune on a psychologist. It's a tool that I recognize as being one of the most impactful tools which, honestly, I do not like at all. Yet most of those who use it swear by it. Did you guess what that tool is? Did you? Well, it's Backstage. Why is it potentially the most important tool, you might ask? Well, it is highly extensible front end that can serve as a portal to your internal system. It is one of the most contributed and most used projects in the CNCF landscape. Almost everyone is adopting it. Its ability to represent almost anything in a user interface that looks like something teleported from 90s is amazing. Yet, I started this discourse by saying that it will give you nightmares and result in additional sessions with your psychologist. How can that be? How can a tool be both amazing and horrible at the same time? Well, it's a project that does not publish binaries. There is no container image. There is no Helm chart or any other installation method other than here's source code written in TypeScript. Do with it what you can. Spend eternity reading the docs just to be able to run it somehow. Learn TypeScript if you don't know it already. Once you figure out how to deploy it, you will be faced with constant maintenance issues. If, for example, you're using your own image, which is a reasonable assumption since there is no official image, you'll have to rebuild it every time you decide to add a plugin. And given that almost everything is a plugin, you'll be doing that fairly often. You might find then an unofficial Helm chart only to realize that you'll still need to build your own images while at the same time trying to figure out why the chart itself does not work and why default values happen to be useless. Imagine being in a restaurant, ordering a steak with a side of potatoes and a beer. Imagine that the restaurant you're in happened to be recommended by everyone and that it has 5-star reviews. Yet, after a while, your waiter invites you to the kitchen saying, "Here you go. There's the meat. Cut it and grill it. Take those potatoes, peel them, boil them or fry them or do whatever you want to do with them. We are not opinionated. Also, here's yeast and other ingredients for the beer. Prepare everything, brew it, ferment it, bottle it. Once you're done, you can go back to your table and have a dinner. It might be great, or it might be the worst thing you ever tried. It's up to you. You're cooking and brewing. We are not opinionated. You're in control, even if that results in poisoning." That's the experience you can expect with Backstage. It might end up being the best and the most important tool you ever used, or it might end up in a disaster. It's up to you. It all depends on the level of masochism you can endure. The bigger tolerance for pain, the more pleasure. Yet, today I decided to take one of my projects and put Backstage on top of it. However, since I am not a masochist, I will not use Backstage directly, but Roadie. It is Backstage as a service that solves some, if not all, inherent problems with Backstage. Someone else is making sure it is running. Plugins can be easily added. There are plugins otherwise not available to Backstage, and so on and so forth. Now, that does not mean that you have to use Roadie as well. As a matter of fact, I challenge you to do everything I will do today directly in Backstage, and let me know how it went. Put it down in the comments. Here's the important note though. This is not a review of Backstage or Roadie. This is something completely different. This is me trying to add Backstage, or to be more precise, Roadie, with everything my project needs, and by doing that, explore some of the benefits as well as challenges using Backstage, or in this case, Roadie. With that being said, let's see what the project is. My requirements are relatively simple. I have to create repositories that contain everything developers need to work on specific types of applications. There should be source code of whichever language developer chooses. There should be workflows that build binaries and images, run tests, and do whatever else needs to be done. Each release of the application should be deployed to a cluster using Argo CD or Flux. There should be an option to have a database attached to the application. Now, I have all that. And what I want from Backstage is to enable us to fill in fields that will generate all that and visualize everything. A developer should be able to see the status of the application, the optional database, together with all the relevant information. There should be a way to see and interact with pull requests and with workflows or pipeline runs. There are probably a few other requirements I forgot. We'll get to those as we advance through our attempt to do what needs to be done. I already have a repository with everything needed to do what needs to be done, so the challenge is mostly or almost entirely focused on Backstage and Roadie. The first step should be to add the current repository to Roadie's catalog. Here's the catalog definition, and it should be self-explanatory. The name and the description are informative only. The key is in the annotations that specify project slug and the ID, namespace, and label selector that will help Roadie associated with resources in the cluster where it will be running. Further on is the spec, which also more or less serves only informative purpose. Now, we could add that specific catalog from the UI, but we won't do that. Instead, we will instruct Roadie to automatically fetch service catalog and some other files we will use later. As a matter of fact, Roadie does that automatically, but it assumes that those files are in repository root. Since in this case it is in the Backstage directory, we'll have to tell Roadie that it should look for it there as well, no matter which repository we are using. We'll do that by clicking Administration from the left-hand menu in Roadie and choosing GitHub from the Integrations section. Over there, we'll select Manage App Installations and add GitHub organization where we forked the repo. Roadie should have added an entry in the automatically add and remove entities from your catalog section, but as I already mentioned, that might not be enough, since it assumes that the catalog definition is in the root of repositories while we need it to be in the Backstage directory as well. We'll fix that by clicking the plus sign, selecting the organization, and adding blob backstage *.yaml to the path matcher field. And that's it, at least when the catalog in its most basic form is concerned. From now on, we should see a component from every repository that has catalog-info YAML file either in the root or in the Backstage directory. We can confirm that by opening catalog from the left-hand menu, and lo and behold, the .github component is already in the catalog. Let's select it. Now, to be clear, so far we haven't accomplished much more than seeing some static information related to this repository. It contains information hard-coded in the catalog-info YAML file, so let's spice it up just a little bit. This is a manifest that I would like to push to the Git repo. If that GitHub claim is applied to the cluster, Crossplane will create a public repo, source code for an application written in Go, a corresponding database, and it should be synchronized into the cluster using GitOps, or to be more specific, Argo CD. That public repo will also get a pull request, GitHub Actions workflow, and quite a few other things. All that is possible through Crossplane, which is not the subject of this video. It's not. Now, we could write such YAML directly and push it to Git, but that might not be the best option for everyone. Some people like graphical user interfaces and might benefit from a form in Roadie that will allow them to fill in some fields and, upon pressing a button, generate such a manifest and push it to Git. In other words, I want Roadie to do the same operations I would normally do without it. That's all I want. To accomplish that, we need to create a template, and I already prepared one, so let's take a look at it. The real action is happening in the spec section. Over there we have parameters and steps. Parameters are the definition of the form fields that should be available in Roadie, while steps are actions that Roadie should execute when we submit the form. Inside the parameters, we're defining that there should be a name, free text, string field, a public field that will be represented as a drop-down list with values true and false, the registry field with the default value TTL-SH, and so on and so forth. And here it comes. I have two complaints with the properties section. First, why isn't it based on the OpenAPI schema spec? Why reinvent the wheel for something that is generating almost the same result as OpenAPI schema, yet sufficiently different to prevent us from using OpenAPI schema? As a matter of fact, I already have a very similar definition as that one since I created a custom resource definition in my cluster. That CRD is based on OpenAPI schema, and if Backstage would have done the same, I could reuse it instead of defining the same set of fields again. The second complaint is that Backstage, as far as I know, cannot discover that schema. Since my Kubernetes cluster already has that CRD, Backstage could simply ask it for the schema and, if needed, convert it into its own format. Now, to be clear, Backstage is flexible, and one could, at least in theory, create a plugin that would discover schemas from APIs, be it Kubernetes or any other. It's doable, but it hasn't been done. And that's a pity. Then we have steps. First, we are creating a silly log message. Then we are fetching template files from the Backstage templates directory and putting them into Git repos. That's the location Argo CD is monitoring and waiting for new or updated manifests. Before the template is moved to the target path, it is transformed. If, for example, any of the files in the directory has values name, it will be replaced with the value from the name field we specified in the properties section. The same goes for public, registry, language, and so on and so forth. Next, there is the rename action that will rename the manifest template into the value of the name parameter. Assuming that a name one puts into the field is unique, that should also give us unique manifests. Finally, pull request will be created in the GitOps repo. Now, let's take a look at the manifest YAML template referenced earlier. That's the same manifest as the one I said we should store in Git, except that this time it has most of the values parameterized through curly braces, and that's all there is to it. Let's add a template to Roadie. Actually, there is nothing to add. We already instructed Roadie to automatically add YAML files from the Backstage directory in any of the repos, so that template should also be available. That's one of the awesome features of Roadie. We do not need to manually add catalogs or templates. It finds them automatically from Git repos. Since the template is already loaded to Roadie, we can proceed and use it. We'll click the Choose button in the .github template in Roadie. Most of the fields already have same defaults, so I will focus only on those that might need to be changed. So I will type crossplane GH demo as the name, choose Google as the provider, and type 13 as the version of PostgreSQL database server. All that's left is to click the review button, take a quick look whether everything looks okay, and finish with the create button. That should have created the manifest based on our input and created a pull request. Right now, we cannot see that pull request in Roadie, but we can change that easily by adding the pull request plugin. Let's go back to the catalog and select .github component. Over there, we'll press the plus sign and add the plugin. Since there are quite a few plugins available, we should probably search for it. I know that the one we are looking for is a GitHub plugin made by Roadie. So let's search for GitHub Roadie, and that's a search. Shame on you, Roadie, for making the search mostly useless. Okay, so let's change the strategy by simply searching for GitHub, and there we go. The one we're looking for is called router. So let's select that one and click the create and reload layout button. We should see the new tab GitHub pull requests with all the pull requests made in the associated repo. There's only one though, so the choice should be easy. We'll just click the PRID and we can observe the files that were included in the pull request. That's the manifest that Roadie generated when we filled the form. Okay, so let's do the only sensible thing we can do when reviewing a pull request. Merge it without even taking a deeper look into it. If everything works as expected, Argo CD should have detected the new manifest in the main branch and applied it to the cluster. Crossplane running in that cluster should have detected a new claim and created managed resources. As a result, a new repository with source code and Kubernetes manifests and a bunch of other files should have been created in a separate branch, and a PR based on that branch should be there as well. Now, to be clear, I will not go deeper into what's happening in the background and unrelated with Roadie and Backstage, since that's not the subject of this video. If you're interested in what actually happened, please watch that video over there. It's a video based on the same project and goes into more details on how we can bootstrap new projects from Git repos all the way until the application and the database is running in production. What we will do is check the new repository and the pull request that was created in it. Normally, we should be able to see all that in Roadie, but since it is configured to look for specific files in the main branch, we cannot see it in Roadie. At least not until we merge the PR. So let's open the repository, choose pull requests, select the initial PR and follow the instructions in the description. I won't bore you with that part since I'm sure you can do the same on your own. Just do what the description says you should do and you should be fine. Now that we merge the PR to the main line of the newly created repo, and since among other files it contains catalog info YAML, Roadie should be able to auto-detect that repo and show us everything we should know about it. So let's open catalog from the left-hand menu in Roadie and select Crossplane GH demo component. We can see mostly informative details about the component, which happens to be a repo. There is nothing new here. And what is new, at least within the context of this video, is the CI/CD link in the top menu. Actually, it was there all the time, but we haven't used it. Let's see what we have in there. We can see that 2 workflow runs were executed or they are running right now. That's great, since it helps us avoid going to GitHub itself to check the results of GitHub actions. If you need more info about a specific workflow run, we can click on the message and damn, that does not work. But luckily, there is the more info button that can help us figure out what's wrong. And damn, that's pretty useless. So here, listen, this is a message to Roadie. You have a great service. Do not let silly issues like that one change my mind. I know you can access my GitHub actions since you are displaying the runs, so it shouldn't be an issue with privileges, or even if it is, I expect logs to point me into the right direction. An unexpected error has occurred message means nothing, and showing which lines of code are producing errors is even more useless in a SaaS service where I don't have access to that code. Okay? So, as it is now, we can see workflow runs, but the links to actual runs do not work. I guess that's better than nothing. Now that we saw that workflow runs were executed, and assuming that Argo CD did its job and synchronized the manifest into the cluster, and that Crossplane expanded it into application and database resources, we should be able to see what is running in my cluster. We can do that with kubectl or some other CLI, or even better, we can bring that information into Roadie. Since today's goal is to use Roadie and Backstage as the main interface for developers, we'll go with the latter option. We can do that by adding the Kubernetes plugin to the catalog. To do that, first we need to configure Roadie to give it access to the cluster. We can do that by going back to administration and choosing Kubernetes from the plugin section. What comes next depends on the type of cluster one is running. In my case, that's GKE in Google Cloud. So I'll just follow the instructions, and since that part is boring, I'll fast forward to the end where I test DOT my cluster, save the changes, save again, and apply and restart. Now, that apply and restart button is just silly. I can't believe that someone designed a plugin-based system that needs to be restarted every time we add or modify a plugin. It's not 1999 anymore. On a bright side, that's not fault of Roadie, but Backstage itself. As a matter of fact, the apply and restart action is easier and faster than what we would need to do if we are using Backstage directly. All in all, we have a silly design choice in Backstage and an excellent, yet not perfect, improvement done by Roadie. So let's get back. Now that the Kubernetes plugin is configured, we can go back to the catalog and select Crossplane GH demo component. Over there we can see the Kubernetes tab added. If it's not there for you, add it just as you added the PR plugin. Now we are faced with yet another silliness. The Kubernetes plugin has a few resource definitions hard-coded. We can visualize pods, deployments, and a few other resources. But as soon as we start using custom resources, we are getting blind. Whomever made that plugin seemed not to be aware that there's more to Kubernetes than pods, replica sets, deployment services, and ingresses. That Kubernetes is dynamic, and more importantly, that it should discover which resource definitions are available. It should just ask the cluster, what do you have? That's one of the reasons why we use APIs. They're discoverable. Even if that's not an option, the plugin could ask me to specify myself which resources to observe. That's, again, not Roadie's fault, unless we start blaming them for not creating a better plugin that would replace the community plugin. So here's another one, message to Roadie folks. Kubernetes is widely used, and it would be very, very, very beneficial if you would create a better plugin to visualize Kubernetes resources. Okay, let me ignore the silliness of hard coding which resources Kubernetes cluster has and see what we'll get if we click the Kubernetes tab that was just added. And damn, that's just silly again. Not only that the plugin hard-coded which resources are visualized, but I can safely say that what is in front of me right now is the worst Kubernetes visualization I ever saw. And I saw ugly ones, many of them. All in all, the Kubernetes plugin is almost useless. And just to be clear, this is not Roadie's fault, but simply issue with that and many other Backstage plugins. They are often half-baked and semi-useless. So, if the Kubernetes plugin is of no use, we would need to see what's going on in the cluster through CLIs and completely ignore Backstage, or in this case, Roadie. For example, those are the resources crossplane application claim created. In turn, we can see what are underlying resources created from those crossplane managed resources. We also got the database claim, so let's confirm that it is working as expected. Those managed resources are, well, managing resources in the chosen hyperscaler, which in my case is Google Cloud. What we saw so far only scratches the surface of what Backstage and Roadie can do. There's much more to it, but not enough time to explore it all. If you would like to know more about Backstage and or Roadie, please let me know in the video comments. For now, I have to say that Roadie is a pleasure to use. It is certainly much easier, more intuitive, and with less maintenance overhead than Backstage. I strongly recommend it, at least if you chose Backstage. This is a better option. Thank you for watching, see you in the next one, cheers.